Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the book of Joshua, Yehoshua, Sefer Yehoshua. We are studying chapter 9. And in the last podcast, we completed chapter 8. And we did the first two verses of chapter 9 because they were really the end of chapter 8. I want to remind you of those two verses and why it's important that we connect them to the end of chapter 8, because it is a perfect lead-in to this next chapter, which we're about to read, chapter 9. So if you recall, after the people of Israel conquered the city of Ai, Yehoshua gathered all the people together to read to them the Torah and to teach them that this war of conquest is a war, a moral, a just war, a war against idolaters that had abominable practices, and a war that was meant to establish monotheism as a system of morality in the world. And that Yehoshua was reminding them after their first major victory in battle that didn't have clear, obvious miraculous help from God. There were some miracles in Ai, but nothing to like the level that happened at Jericho. He didn't want it to get to their head, so to speak. He wanted to remind them of the purpose here. We demonstrated that during that gathering there were Gerim, there were converts, people that had joined the Jewish people, and we also mentioned that Yehoshua was following the instructions that had been given to the people in Deuteronomy, which was to sue for peace first. I know that was disagreeing with Rashi's understanding, but it is consistent with the understanding of the Ramban and the Rambam, and it's also, I neglected to point out when I mentioned it before, consistent with Chazal. There is a medrash in Devarim that the rabbis mentioned that Yehoshua offered the people of Canaan peace first, and that they had the opportunity to make peace with the people of Israel. And there was also a Yerushalmi in Talmud, Yerushalmi as well, that says the same thing. So it's very consistent. Now, the issue here, this is important because it helps us understand what we're about to read. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, the Rashi's approach to the seven nations seems to be what the more pervasive one, the one that has seemed to be more accepted. But even though it kind of goes against the simple reading of the psukim in Devarim and against the understanding of the two chazals which I just mentioned. Now, so we mentioned that at the end of chapter 8. I'm sorry, I have to get back to that. And then immediately after mentioning this ceremony of reading the Torah, reading the blessings and the curses of the Torah, it says that all of the kings of the Canaanites gathered together, and all the other nations that inhabited the land, the other seven nations that inhabited the land of Israel, and they decided, once they heard about the destruction of Jericho and Ai, and they heard the reading of the Torah and the moral message that Yehoshua was trying to teach. This is why it's so important that it's connected, because it's connected to the teaching of the Torah. They got together and said, we're going to fight it. They gathered together in order to wage war. Emphasizing, the verses here are emphasizing again this idea, which is crucial to understanding Yehoshua. And I'm sorry if I repeat it again and again, but I'm repeating it because it's repeated in the psukim verses over and over and over again. That they were against this idea of the Torah that Yehoshua was trying to introduce, and they refused to make peace with it, and instead they banded together and made an alliance against Yehoshua. So they understood that this was an ideological war, and they consciously decided to wage the ideological war. Understanding that, there were some people among the Canaanites who did want to make peace and want to join the Jewish people, but they were afraid to do so because of the backlash that they would suffer from those other the other nations. They knew right away that if we go ahead and join the Jewish people, we will create a whole lot of enemies. So they needed to come up with another approach. I've seen several commentaries, more modern commentaries. Most specifically, I read a similar explanation to what I'm saying in Michael Hatton's book in the Magid series of Tanakh, published by Koren Publishers, where he takes a similar approach to what I'm saying now. There are other commentaries that do it too, but he kind of lays it out nicely. A little different than me, but the same basic idea, that the reason for what we're about to read was primarily, and in the context it makes so much sense. Yoshua teaches the Torah. The people of Canaan then go ahead and say, we're against that. We're ready to fight that, which is why that parsha is together. And now, V'yoshvei Givon, those people, and this is verse 3, I'm starting chapter 9 with verse 3, because 1 and 2 were connected to before, the chapter divisions being the way the Jewish chapter divisions are, not the way the Christian chapter divisions are, because it's wrong to put those two verses as the heading of this parsha. Those two verses should be the end of the last one. V'yoshvei Givon, the people that resided in Givon, Shama'u, they heard Es Asher Asa Yoshua LeYericho V'La'ai. They heard that which Yoshua had done to Yericho and Ai. They heard this message. And they wanted to join Yehoshua. They wanted to save themselves. They wanted to join the Israelites. So they came up with it. But if they knew that if they were going to do this, they would... Rashi understands they were trying to save themselves because the Canaanites were condemned to death no matter what. But that's not really how this works. What they were trying to save themselves from death at the hand of Yoshua, but they wanted to join Yoshua, and they were even more afraid, and we'll see in the context how clear this is, they were even more afraid of the Canaanites. So they vayasu gam hema ba'arma, so they therefore decided to do something tricky. Vayelchu vayitztayaru, and they went and they disguised themselves. Vayikhu sakim bolim lachamoreim, and they took sackcloths that were worn out and threw them over their donkeys. You know, the sacks that they placed on the donkeys, they made them worn out as if they had been on a long trip. V'nodos yayin balim, and worn out skins for water. These would carry water in leather skins. Umivuka'im umitzoroim, that were cracked, and they were patched up with patches like one would put when they're on the road. Unaolos balos, and worn out shoes, umitulaos biragleim, and that were torn up and patched up on their feet. Usilamos balos aleim, and the clothing they put on were also worn as if they were on a long journey. V'chol lechem tzedam yavesh hayan nikudim, and they took bread with them that was dried and falling apart and crummy. And they approached Joshua and the camp where they were camped at Gilgal, looking in like this, like they had just come from a long journey. And they said to Joshua, the Elish Yisrael, and to the people of Israel, they said as follows: Me'eretz Rechoka Banu, we have come from a faraway land. V'atah kirsu lanu bris. We're not one of these Canaanites that have just declared ourselves to be enemies of yours, but rather we want to make peace with you. We want to make a covenant, a treaty with you. Vayomer ish Yisrael el achivi. And the people replied to the Givonites, who were actually Chivites. They were actually Hivites, which were one of the 7 nations. Ulai bekirbiata yoshev. Maybe you live amongst our land. Maybe you live in our land, Israel, because they're claiming this as us, our land now, right? Maybe you live there. Ve'ech echras l'chabris. How could we make a covenant with you if you have just made a covenant against us? You've just declared yourselves to be the enemies. If you are one of the Hivites have just so you're coming in. Your idea is to destroy us. You're trying to play tricks on us. Vayomer el Yoshua, they said to Yeshua, No avodecha anachnu, we are your servants. Vayomer aleim Yoshua, and Yeshua said to them, Mi atem umei ayin tavo. So then, who are you? If you're not one of the Hivites, and from where have you come? Vayomer elav me'eretz rechoka ma'od bo avodecha, we have come from a very faraway land. L'shem Adonai Elohecha, and because of the fame and the and the reputation of the Lord your God. Ki shamanu shamo, we have heard his news, we heard all about him, and all the things that he has done in Egypt. And we also heard that which he did to the kings of the Amorites, who are on the other side of the Jordan. Do you know what Moses did? Sichon melech Heshbon, Og melech Bashan, asher ba'ashtaros, Sichon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites that were conquered under Moshe on the eastern side of the Jordan. Vayomru eleinu, so our elders said to us, V'chol yoshvei artzeinu, and all the people living in our land, Neymar, K'chuvi edchem tzedel haderech, take the supplies that you need for the road, U'lechu likrosem, and go greet them, V'amartem aleim avdechem anachnu, and tell these people of Israel, we are your servants, V'ata kirsu lanu bris, we want to make a covenant with you, we want to join you. Zelach meinu cham, this bread of ours, which was hot, Hitztayadnu osomi batenu, when we packed it up in our homes back where we live. Yom tesenu lechas aleichem, when we left to come to you. V'yatahine yavesh v'hayenu kedim, and look, now it's all dried up and crummy. Ve'ela nodos hayayin asher milenu chadashim, and these are the jugs of wine that we filled up with new wine. V'nei tbako, and look, they're all cracked. Ve'ela salmoseinu nolenu, these are our clothing and our shoes. Balu merova derech ma'od, and they all are worn out from this long road. Va'ikcho anoshim mitzedam yaspia Adonai lo sha'alu. And the people looked at the evidence. The people of Israel looked at the evidence, and they did not ask God for advice whether these people were for real or not. Vayaslem Yoshua Shalom. So Yoshua made peace with them by Yichros bris lem bris lachiosam, and he made with them a covenant to allow them to live. Vayishavu lehem nesiei ha'eda, and the leaders of the community swore to them that they would keep them safe and allow them to live. Note that they did not mention, when they talked about what God did, the things that he had just done to Yericho and Ai. They talked about Egypt, they talked about the old victories. Again, part of their ruse to show that they had come from a faraway land. Had they been in this land, they would have known about what had just happened. But since they came from a faraway land, it's much more plausible for them to say that we heard the old stuff, but the new news we haven't yet heard. And it was about 3 days after they made this agreement with them. The news came, and they figured out that actually they were neighbors. They were from the Hivites. They lived there in the land of Israel with them. And they lived within the land of the Israelites. So the people of Israel went and traveled to their city where they originated. On that third day, V'yareim Givon v'hakfiro v'eros v'kiryat Yearim, and the cities which they had originally inhabited were these cities which are in the central Israel, right near where they were. However, so they knew, and they checked the place where they came from, and they found that these people had played this ruse. V'lo hikum b'nei Yisrael, but the people of Israel did not strike them, ki nishbu lehem nesiei ha'eda, because So a lot of people, I just want to mention, use this story of the Givonites to prove Rashi's understanding correct. That because if they had offered peace to everyone, why did the Givonites need to pull this ruse? Why did they need to play these tricks? The Ramban, Nachmanides, has some explanations, but the explanation that I gave is kind of similar to some of the Ramban's explanations, but it just makes so much more sense, and it reads so beautifully into the Psukim. The Givonites played this game because they were afraid of the Canaanites, not because they were afraid of the Israelites. And even to support this contention even more, we'll find out and read very soon that the Givonites did very soon, shortly, suffer the wrath of the Canaanites. Ki nishbuhem nesiei ha'eda. The reason why the Jews did not strike the Givonites when they found out that they had played this trick on them, they did not harm them because they had made a shvua. They had sworn to them that they would allow them to live B'Adonai Elohei Yisrael, by God's name, the God of Israel, Vayilonu chol amal anisim. And the people were angry against the leaders. Why did you make this trick? Why did you agree to this trick? And maybe these guys are imposters. They're trying. Their peace isn't real. They're really not loyal, etc., etc., etc. And the leader said to the entire community, we swore to them by God's name, we're not allowed to touch them. We cannot harm them. Even though this Shavua technically is not valid because it was made under mistaken circumstances, but they still refused and to break their vow, which is again an extremely important demonstration to the people of Canaan that the people of Israel are different. Their morals, the ethics are different, and their word is solid. Zos na'aseh lohem achayosam. This we will do for them. We will allow them to live. V'lo yeh aleinu ketzef. So there should be no reaction of anger on God against us, al hashvua asher nishba'u lahem, because of this, because of the shvua, because of the oath that we had made to them. Now, this ketzef, this anger, might be anger of the Canaanites, because you didn't keep your shvua, but it probably more likely means they're afraid of God's anger. Vayomer aleim hanesiim. And the Nesiim, the leaders, said to them, Yichyu, right? They shall live. V'yu chotvei eitzim v'shoavei mayim l'chol ha'eda. And they said they wanted to serve us, so they can chop wood and draw water for the community. We will allow them to serve us, kasher dibru lem Nesiim, just like the leaders had told them. Vayikra lem Yoshua, and Yoshua called the people and Vaydaber aleim lemar, and told them as follows: Lama rimisem osanu, why did you fool us, lemar, to say rechokim anachnu mikem, oh, that we came from a faraway place? V'atem bikirbeinu yoshvim, but you live among us. Yoshua's question, according to Rashi's understanding, doesn't make that much sense. What do you mean, Lama rimisem? Why did you fool us? Yoshua, it would know very obviously why they fooled us. If they were slated for death, and offers of peace were not they were not extended to them, right? Then of course they fooled them because they were fooling them to save their lives. No, Yoshua was asking them this question because why did you have to come in trickery? We offered you peace terms. You could have just come back and said, yes, we'll take it. We'll take the deal. We'll be peaceful with you. Why did you have to do it through trickery? That's the reason. In other words, you should have, if you really believed in God and you really wanted to join us, then why were you afraid of the Canaanites? Why were you afraid of them? You should have just joined us out in the open, and you would have been welcomed with open arms, just like the Gerim, the converts that I just mentioned that were here with us when we read the Torah. And now, arurim, you are cursed. V'lo yikares mikem eved. And from now on, the rest of your descendants' lives, you will always be in servitude. V'chot ve'etzim, you will be wood choppers of shoavei mayim and drawers of water leveis Elohai, for the house of my God. In other words, you will serve the temple. And as we know, that their descendants, all the way down to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah in the beginning of the Second Temple period, some 800 years later, the descendants of the Givonim were still doing the same service. Vayanu et Yoshua, and they answered Joshua Vayomer, and they said, Ki huged hugad la'avadecha etz asher tziva Adonai Elech et Moshe avdo. It was told to your servants, us, that which God commanded Moses, his servant, laseis lachem, to give them that kol haaretz, the entire land, ulahashmid et kol yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, and to destroy all of the residents of the land from before you. Vanira mod lenafshosenu mipnechem, we were very afraid. Vanaseh es hadavar zeh, that's why we did this. And remember, the Givonim did not trust. They didn't know. They knew that the Israelites were there to destroy and conquer, but they didn't know about the morals. They didn't know that the Israelites were going to keep their word. They didn't know that when they were offered peace, that it would be taken and the Israelites would keep their word. The way they're being treated now, that the Israelites are keeping their word and keeping them safe despite the trickery, is something that the Givonites did not know. Viata, and now hinenu v'yadecha, we are under your hands. Katov v'chayashar be'enecha lasos lanu aseh. You can do with us however you feel is proper. Vayashlam Cain, and this is what he did. Vayatzelo sam miyad b'nei Yisrael v'lo harogam. Yoshua saved them from the hands of the Israelites, because the Israelites wanted to kill them because of their trickery, but Yoshua, as the leader, did not allow them to do so. Vayitneim Yoshua bayomahu, and Yoshua placed them on that day, appointed them as chot ve'etzim v'shoavei mayim la'eda, as wood choppers and water carriers for the community, u'lemizbach Adonai ad yom hazeh, and for the altar of God until this day, el hamakom asher yivchar, into the place where God would choose, because we knew that eventually, as the Torah had said, God would choose a place for the tabernacle to stop traveling and rest and build a permanent home, which eventually became the temple in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for studying chapter 9 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 10 together, and we will continue the story of the Givonites and see how their fears of retribution from their fellow Canaanites were eventually realized. Looking forward to studying chapter 10 and the rest of this book of Joshua together.